Today I'll focus on painting some 30k Death Guard white armor. I ended up deciding to build up from an ochre color into a desaturated brown and a light skin tone. All colors will be diluted 1:1 with water, so that the slight transparency will help blend everything together. I made use of the same tool from my last video to apply the paint, which is just a piece of sponge I glued to the back of a pencil and trimmed down to a cone shape. Stippling the paint will allow me to achieve a more battered, realistic look. I am not a huge fan of clean armor. Since the paint has been diluted, a second coat will be applied, and with it we'll start to see the transparency of the acrylics do its work, where the randomness of the sponge will leave speckles of black and every base coat applied. This might seem worthless as we move on to lighter and lighter tones, which will completely cover the previous coats. However, since we are working with transparent paints, every single coat will be affected by the ones underneath. I've talked many times before on the difficulty of painting white, but just like with any other light color, it is best to build up from other dark tones instead of insisting with the same again and again. Normally, this would translate to using a gray followed by a light gray before moving on to the white. However, since I'm looking for a more dirty white in the end, building up from brownish tones is the way to go. For the final white stippling, I placed the arms in their place and used an old brush, for a more controlled application only on the more exposed areas of the models, like the head, chest and vambrace. Having built up this granulated white armor, I'll smooth everything up through a glaze. I kept to an ochre color similar to the first coat, and diluted it with water in a 4:1 ratio. This was applied all over the armor and spread evenly so as to avoid any paint pooling anywhere. This heavily diluted coat will tie up the armor with a very slight tint of dirt. I am not looking to create any shadows with this glaze, but rather enhance a bit more the yellowish brown tone of the armor without having it stop reading as white. Any excess paint I see pooling, I'll soak back up to my brush. From here, the other base coats were applied and I moved on to pin washing. To create separation from one panel to the other, I begin by first applying plain water to the recesses. Then, using another brush with a nice point, I'll let either diluted acrylics or inks flow onto the water by themselves. The only difference with using acrylics is that you might need to do a second coat to get a really dark defined shadow. Like I often do, I'll link above my video dedicated to this technique. It is important to note that since I was very carefree with the water application, this did end up leaving me with some bleeding, which for this Death Guard model actually works quite well. For a more precise end result, we should look out to not apply too much water. At this point, I diluted a bit of orange-brown to shade the metallic parts, and while I tend to use diluted acrylics for this to appeal to more people who are just beginning painting, if you count with washes, do use them since they are designed for this. In the end, the orange-brown wasn't dark enough, so I applied another coat with the first dark brown I could find. To finish up and really enhance the contrast between the armor and the recesses, I stippled pure white once again and you'll see how thin this paint is. This was applied once again in the more exposed volumes. Only a couple taps here and there, almost unperceivable but still there to provide some extra punch. Once done, I also did some gentle dry brushing over the metallics to bring back a bit of shine, and after basing I was left with this. I hope you found this video useful. I'll be working on another Space Marine next week before moving back to some fantasy. If you'd like to see more 30k in the future, let me know which legion you'd like to see me paint.